on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
All those things that, people who don't want to plot at all or plan anything in advance, that's fine. But I think that's where you're going to miss out on some opportunity to make your book really stand out.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello, it's Friday and welcome to the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson. Hello.
How are you, Mark Dawson? Got your hat on today. Is that your golfing hat?
Actually, I did play golf this morning. Yes, it's a golfing hat of sorts. Yes, it's autumn now, properly, isn't it? It's windy and chilly a little bit here.
We had a lovely, what we call Indian summer. I think we can still say Indian summer. It sounds like a sort of thing we can't say anymore, but I think you can. An Indian summer being a late summer. It was absolutely beautiful. Yes, to John, of course, is half Indian. Beautiful couple of weeks, wasn't it? And I played my first grown-up round of golf this week for 20 years.
What did you get?
123.
Okay. That's probably about my level, to be honest. I think we were probably we'll be similarly rubbish.
I would like to get down. I had two bunkers, which gobbled up 11 shots. And the sand is very firm and wet, and I couldn't get the ball out. So
bunkers are quite easy to get out of. I'll show you how.
If the sand is pliable, but anyway, annoyingly, on the 18th was one of them, 5 shots to get out, and I was in the bunker off the green on a par 4 for 2. It was really tough course. I'm not playing it again. It was far too hard. It punished good shots for amateurs like me. Not playing it again. There's got to be easier courses around it. Anyway, enough golf. Before we do anything else, let me welcome Michael Allen Peck. You get a shout out because you are Patreon supporter of the week, who's joined us this week. Thank you very much indeed, Michael. You can go to patreon.com/self-publishing show and support the show and get lots of goodies. We should also mention that Self-Publishing 101 is open sesame. Opened a couple of days ago at the time we're recording this. Will have been open a week and a bit by the time this goes out. We've had a fabulous first couple of days. Very excited to see lots of new students full of enthusiasm coming into the dedicated Facebook group, all ready to get going. It's been good. I love this bit.
It has, but we've made a few mistakes, haven't we? This time we've been running around doing lots of different things, and one of the things, annoyingly, we all missed it, was in the email that was sent out announcing the course was open. We had the wrong price, and it was wrong the wrong way as well. So $50 more expensive when people got to the actual sales page, which is we do not like. That kind of experience. And we have had a few people just kind of saying, what prices I'm supposed to pay. So apologies if that was, you had a nasty surprise when you got to the sales page. Just one of those things. We try very hard to make sure that is all nice and smooth. But we all missed that. Me, you, John, young Tom, Uncle John Cobley, everyone.
I think it was I think they were both my fault. I worked out last night. It's taken us a while to work out what happened with the price one, but I think they were both my fault. So mea culpa on that one.
I knew it was you, but I've been polite. We all knew it was you. We've been talking behind your back. So James is basically losing his marbles.
Yes, lots going on at the moment. I'm running lots of businesses, doing my few stuff every day. Now, I wanted to mention, I don't know if you've watched it. I forgot to warn you about this, ask you if you've seen it, but have you seen The Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix?
No, I haven't. I think I've heard about it, but no, I haven't seen it.
So it was mentioned in the community group in a discussion by a couple of people, and I think it's a compulsory viewing for us. Now, it's quite a big theme stuff. It's about the impact of social media on children's development, on what's the truth and facts, and distorting the way democracies work. So big theme stuff. Smaller to us is just the fact that this is coming down the line. I think there's going to be regulation. There might even be guerrilla tactics to try and take social media networks down potentially. People really feel strongly about the influence they're having impact. And so it's just another reminder that we rely on some of these platforms. I mean, for Fuse books, almost 100% is driven by Facebook advertising. So Facebook suddenly got attacked and went down for a month or two, or regulation came in, and we're already feeling the results of them being over cautious about everything, aren't we? We're seeing accounts being turned off and ads being rejected as they get very nervous about this. But there's a very big discussion starting to happen about, as we're waking up to the actual impact of social media is having on people. I think it's a really interesting documentary and one that we should watch. So I'd be interested to hear what you think about it when you see it.
Yeah, I will. And I had saw a comment in the mastery group. This one I can't remember. In one of I think it was in the community. Someone just a blanket statement because two authors had posted in another group that Facebook ads didn't work for them. This author decided that they didn't work at all, which is like, honestly, I don't. Well, anyway, I basically replied, said it was nonsense, and lots of other authors who basically, like Fuse, depend on Facebook for finding new readers. It's not easy. It's not easy to get ads that work. If it was, there'd be lots of millionaire authors running around. But to say that they don't work is just a bit silly, really. We've got plenty of examples from myself to what you're doing with Fuse and hundreds of other authors who drive a lot of their sales through Facebook ads.
Yeah, no, it's not always easy. It's definitely more expensive for me at the moment. I think the margin's been cut a little bit since last month and the month before. So I don't know if this is my first sort of cycle through the year running active ads, but I'm guessing that it gets a little bit more expensive running up to Christmas and Black Friday's big commercial times. And COVID helped us in the middle of summer when it was quite cheap. But and
the election, there's all kinds of different things that are playing together to make it a little bit more expensive at the moment. But it is cyclical. So as those big budgets will pull out from the marketplace as we get into next year, and CPC will come down again. It's I've seen it a few times now.
Yeah, but still making a profit, just having to work hard at it. Think about the optimization side of things. I've done a really bad job of shaving. You're watching on YouTube.
So have I.
Yeah, you've done a worse job than me. I think actually it's better to not shave than to do what I've done, which is leave bits there and bits there. Horrible. Anyway, what else are we going to talk about? We've got a webinar. We have some live training coming up, which is a webinar actually we've given before, but it's a very useful one, and it does get very well attended. And it's about how to get your first or your next 10 reviews. So really, Mark, this is aimed at people who are low on reviews, maybe don't even have any. And it's a chicken and egg situation for authors, isn't it? Because reviews lead to sales, but it's without sales, you don't get reviews. So how do you get going? How do you start? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I've done this webinar a few times now. It is always quite popular. I mean, I remember very, very well when I was starting out in 8 years ago, whatever it was now, and just have no idea how to do it. I could not get sales, and then I knew that I needed reviews to get more sales. But where was I going to get the reviews from if no one was downloading the book? It was very, very tricky. And there are ways to do it, and there are ways to get reviews that weren't available back then. So things like I think Story Origin offers a feature now, Booksprout. What else? There's a few hidden gems. There's a few services like that enable readers enable writers to get their books in front of reviewing readers. So we can go through. We'll go through that and some kind of some methods that have tried and true. They've passed the test over time. Don't usually cost anything. Completely ethical. So everything is in line with the Amazon Terms of Service. And ways that you can after the webinar, go away, put those into effect, and I would be surprised if you don't start seeing reviews, maybe not a ton, but you should get some reasonably soon after. So it's definitely worth turning up and listening to me waffle about reviews for 45 minutes or so.
It's a live dose of the comedy duo that you and me are. It's on Tuesday, the 6th of October at 9 p.m. in London. That's 4 p.m. in New York and 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, and something like 5 or 6 in the morning the next day in Sydney. And if you want to sign up, you will. If you want to attend, you will have to sign up and get a registration join link. And you can do that at selfpublishingformula.com/getbookreviews. Get Book Reviews. And we will see you there. Okay, right. So shall we move on to our interviewee? And this week it is Christina Kaye. You will be very familiar with Jenny Nash, who's been on the show a few times as our resident editor for the book labs. Must get another book lab going. I'll find out where we are with that after the show. And Christina's in the same sort of line of business. So she does book coaching. She works with authors, particularly new authors like me. I found it incredibly useful working with Jenny. Absolutely loved it as an experience, almost like going to night school and learning how to write. And Christina works with her own little company, her own little group, part of the community. Particularly works on character development. So that's what we talked about in this interview. So let's hear from Christina.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Christina, welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. Lovely to have you here. And
thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah. Thank you also for bumping the interview by one day to help us out, because the American podcast calendar we have doesn't understand that we have bank holidays in the UK. And
lucky you.
We're lazy. What can I say? We have about 7 of them. But,
you said it, I didn't.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, look, Christina, we're going to talk a bit about working with a developmental editor, with a book coach, or perhaps the difference between those two as well, if there's a subtle difference. And let us start with a bit about you. So why don't you tell us your elevator pitch of who Christina Kaye is?
My elevator pitch. Okay. Boy, it's been a while since I've given that, but I think I can give it a try. So I've been in the publishing author community industry for about 10 years. I started just as trying to be the author and tried the traditional route, and actually did get picked up by an agent, had some books published, won some awards, things like that. But then about 8 years ago or so, I started just editing for friends, which turned into a freelance side gig, which turned into, just kind of grew on its own and turned into some coaching on the side. If you fast forward to January of this year, I launched Write Your Best Book, which is basically, it's me scaling the freelance editing and coaching and making it a little bit bigger, because I wanted to reach and help as many authors as I could. Because I thought back to that 10 years ago time period when, at that time anyway, there were not that many resources for authors. And what was there, you had to kind of pick through to determine what to listen to, what to ignore. So I wanted to help as many as I could. And therefore, we launched Write Your Best Book in January. And that includes a podcast and author coaching, like you were talking about, and book editing. And so now I'm an indie author, though. I kind of jumped ship from traditional. So my last 2 books have been self-published.
Okay. Superb. Well, that sounds like a great nutshell, Christina. And we want to talk, I think, about working. Was this particularly pertains to authors like me at the beginning of their career? I think they get the most benefit out of a book coach and a developmental editor.
I believe so. When you say author like me, you mean what, like a more self-published author?
Well, someone who's just starting out, I would say, is what I mean.
Okay, so that's where I have clients who run the gamut from, I haven't even ever written a book, all the way up through, I've published 10, but they're not working out for me. But yeah, I believe, honestly, especially the coaching, when that comes in, it does benefit newer authors, more emerging authors a little bit more, because that's where the hand-holding comes in, and going through some of the craft-related teaching and skills and things like that can really help. So yes, with the book coaching, author coaching, does lean more towards emerging authors.
And do you think this is an essential thing for authors as they get going, or is it just a niche area for some authors?
I believe it's twofold. I believe book editing is absolutely 100% undeniably essential, especially if you're going to be a self-published author. I don't think there's any way around that. I think it's an investment in your book and in your writing career. Author coaching, on the other hand, I don't think everyone needs it. I think it would just depend on that person's needs. If they're struggling with structure, if they're struggling with setting a writing schedule and getting motivated, and if they need someone to kind of hold their hand through some of the craft issues, then yeah, I do think in those cases, it would be very, very helpful and very beneficial.
Okay, so let's talk about the process a little bit. If somebody's perhaps got their first draft done, or they've been knocking about with an idea for a book, and they come to you, what's the process look like?
Well, again, on the author coaching side, it's going to look a little different than editing. Editing, the book's got to be done, and then we go from there and we polish it. If someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I need an author coach, usually they're either not even started writing their first word, or they've just got a chapter or two done and they've realized they need help. So what that entails, usually it depends on where they are, but I usually will review, at least this is the way I do it. I'll review their progress for each week, and we'll set a call for the next week, and we'll set assignments. If they get stuck, if they get, quote, writer's block, I'll have exercises lined up that I always like to give them to do to try to get unstuck. There's a lot of motivating that goes involved, because I think when you have an author coach, you're held accountable. You kind of have that feeling of not pressure. I want to walk a fine line between pressuring my clients, yet still holding them accountable. So they'll bring me, say, hey, this week I did 1 or 2 chapters. I'll look over them and give them some basic feedback, not editing per se, but just some general feedback. And they really seem to really enjoy that process a lot. But there's a lot of motivating and hand-holding that goes on with author coaching.
Yeah. And I felt the benefit of that myself, having used the book coach. The simply keeping honest bit, you can't underestimate its value to you, because you are on your own as an author. Nobody... particularly unless you get a buddy to help you, nobody cares whether you get your words done or not. True. And in that environment, it can be easy just to let things slip. But when you're reporting to somebody once a week, actually, you can do this with a buddy, and lots of people do. They'll find a friend who's writing as well, and they'll report their word counts to each other at the end of the week. And a simple trick like that can make a big difference. But let's go back. Let's go back to this situation where you've got somebody who's starting out. They're not quite sure how to structure the book and so on. I mean, do you talk through structure with them at the beginning? Do you talk through story? Do you want to fully understand where they're going with the book at the beginning to help them?
Usually what we'll do, if they already have, some come to me and they already have an outline. In that case, that's great. We've already tackled the first thing that I would do with them, which is to create an outline. I'm a big plotter, not so much a pantser. So I believe in, personally, the benefits of, you don't even have to get it down to the scene, but just some general outlining, I think, can help every author. So they'll come to me either with or without an outline, and we'll do one if they haven't. And then we'll talk through if there are some structural things that I see right off the bat on that outline. We'll go ahead and address those, and we'll get their plot, their acts kind of nailed down and their story arcs and everything kind of straightened out. And then it depends on where they are with their writing based on a sample I've seen. If they seem like they need some basic coaching on the craft issues, then I have a resource vault of, different craft issues like dialogue and how to create a villain, or how to, do a story arc, or how to add voice. All those little things are in my vault, and I just kind of pull them out and send them to the author, and we work on craft for a week or two till we kind of get some of the major issues nailed down. If they're pretty good on craft and don't really need much handholding there, then we go ahead and dive into the story itself and the character development. I'm a big proponent of sketching your characters out before you even start writing. So I like to try to encourage my clients to do that as well.
Do you want to sketch out the character's journey? Not just how they are at the time at the beginning of the book? You want to...
Yeah, I personally like to get a good character sketch done of all my main characters. Anybody who really has a character arc. Of course, not the waitress at the diner, but
it might be about the waitress at the diner.
If it's about the waitress at the diner, then yes, you're right. Yeah. But if there's a character that's going to have a major story arc, I believe personally in going ahead before you start writing and sketching out, because you've got to have not just their physical descriptors and their personality, which everybody knows to do that. I think if you don't sketch it beforehand, you may not think so much about their backstory, their emotional wounds, their motivations and their goals, and all those things. If you do a sketch ahead of time, can really, really help you have a grasp of that character before you even start writing them. And that way, those things don't get lost or forgotten.
Yeah. And I was going to say, what about the pantser? What about the person who simply wants to write? I mean, Stephen King famously just writes, and and Marie Force is somebody else who just writes and things unfold in front of her. She's writing. Am I thinking that person's probably not going to come to you as a book coach, or do they come to you and you work with them slightly differently and say, well, okay, let's see what unfolds this week?
if one of my clients, for example, that I'm working with right now, we're wrapping up his book, and he did not want to plot. He didn't want to outline, and he's total pantser. I'm somewhere in between. I lean towards outlining, but I also kind of like to go by the seat of my pants within each chapter. But yeah, we just worked on a different level. I just kind of let him do his thing. And luckily for him, he was able to do it without much structure. However, if I have a client who wants to do it, pants it, per se, but there just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to their plot, then I would just kind of gently encourage them, let's get some things nailed down before we really start writing this book. Because it sounds fun in theory, and some people, you're right, Stephen King, there are tons of authors who can pants it, but it's not for everybody. That's why there's the pansters or plotters debate that will always be ongoing.
And never be answered before anyone emails in. Yeah. I think most people are in between, aren't they? There's,
I think I am. I used to think I was strictly a pantser, and then I realized plotting out your basic acts and story arcs and stuff, really, even if you just do that, can make a big difference.
Yeah. So you have a book coach. Do you set targets? Do you say to them at the beginning, ideally you need to be doing 800 words a day or something? Or do you ask them what their expectations are? And
that's kind of what I do. I ask them, there's a questionnaire that I go through on the first free call when I talk to the potential client. And one of the things I ask them is, have you kind of timed? Do you know how much you can write in a given hour or day? And I have a spreadsheet that I've created for my clients that basically kind of spits out how many reasonable words they should get done in a week. But everybody's not the same. I mean, somebody may work an 8 to 5 job and then have to come home and deal with kids and only get half an hour to write each night. I can't expect them to write, 3 chapters a week. It may not happen. So it all just depends on, we go through their schedule. We set a schedule for them as far as based on their life, can they only do half an hour, 5 days a week? Well, great. We'll work within that. If they're retired or they get to work from home, then we can add some more time in there. But yeah, you're exactly right. That's how I do it. I like to work around their schedule and what they're capable of without adding too much pressure, but yet still having some parameters and a goal to set by the end of the week.
And so at the end of this process, they've got a book that's a draft that's a first draft, I guess, has effectively had a developmental edit. It just had one as it went on.
Yeah, most of mine that have done a coaching, they'll go on and they will only do a line edit after we've worked together, because they really don't need that content edit, because I've already seen the content, we've worked together on it, and I already know it's in good shape. So there's no sense in going through that process, taking that time, or charging that fee, quite frankly, for them if they've already pretty much nailed the structure, because we've worked together for 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be.
Okay, so you get an insight into lots of people's writing. Shall we talk a little bit about some of the mistakes you find and some of the tips that we can give people? So let's talk about some of the common mistakes then that newbies like me make.
Let's do it. You want to talk more craft-related mistakes?
I think so, yeah. We could start certainly with craft and then perhaps talk about the story.
On the craft level, there are several common things I see, because I do free sample edits for all potential clients, and I do several every day. Plus, I have a staff of 4 other editors that also do them every day. So we're doing a lot. The most common things I see are writing in passive voice, which in and of itself is not wrong. It just is not the best writing technique. You should try to write an active voice.
Should we just pause there? Because I think some people do. I know sure. we had Pro Writing Aid on recently, and they talked quite a lot about this. But let's just give examples of what exactly you mean by passive and active voice.
Passive voice would be if you said, she was running to the store. Again, that's not a wrong or incorrect statement, but it slows your pacing down. So if you were to, instead of that, say, she ran to the store, really not much of a big difference in what you're saying, but it just over time in the length of a book, you'll notice now that you've heard this, people will start to notice in other writing or their own writing, oh, that does slow it down. When you have, I was running to the store, and then she was there too, and then I was doing this. If you have was and then an ing verb, that's your passive voice. That's your clue that you're using passive voice. So the really easy way in most cases to fix it is to take out the was, ing, and replace that with an ed verb. And in most cases, not always, sometimes you have to restructure the whole sentence, but in most cases, there's your fix right there.
There you go. A good, clear explanation of that. And it is a very common one.
It is very common. And I always list that as one of the first ones because it's one of the most common things I see. But I do like to preface that it's not wrong.
Yeah.
It's not an incorrect statement or an incorrect way of writing. It's just could really polish your writing if you went ahead and just knocked that out.
Yeah. Well, it's about the reader being in the moment with your character or being told something that's happened. And there's a difference between those two. When you're in the moment, you want to see it. You get excited about how things are going to unfold, which is why you're reading the book.
Exactly. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. And then another very common in early writers that I see is slipping between tenses. So if you choose, which I think this is why they do that, I think that there are 3 essential questions that every author should ask themselves before they start writing. Which tense am I going to write this in, past or present? Or you could do future, but who does? And then which POV is it going to be, first or third or second? And then how many POVs, how many perspectives? And I think that if you don't think to stop and ask yourself these questions and determine them before you start writing, that's when you slip between points of view, or you slip, which we'll talk about in a second, but, and you slip between tenses. And regarding tenses, we'll clarify what that means. So tenses is when your verbs that you're using are all either past tense or the most common two are past tense and present tense. And it depends on the verbiage that you use and which way, whether you're reading the story as the character does it, which is present tense, or whether it's the narrator's telling us what the character did 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago. And if you don't clearly decide for yourself which one you're going to choose, I think a lot of authors slip between it. They'll have one paragraph that's completely in past tense, and then the very next sentence will be in present tense. It's a tough one, I'm not going to lie, and there's not an easy fix other than practice and just, paying close attention to what you're writing. But that's definitely one of the most common mistakes I see authors making.
And do you have a recommendation for people setting out now, thinking about how they're going to write their book? And the first thing they're confronted with is another author. If you haven't got any experience, when another author says you what tense you're writing in it, what perspective, are you omniscient? And you're sitting there thinking, what are you talking about? And you may have read 1,000 books in your life, but you've never really paid attention to this
Never
bit.
think about it.
Do you have a recommendation to make life bearable for a first-time author, what they should be writing in?
As far as tenses go? Yeah, as far as tenses go, I personally have a preference of past third. But I've read plenty of great books that are written in present tense, but I feel like in my experience, more slipping happens in present tense when authors try to attempt the present tense. So I don't think there's a right or wrong. I also think it depends on the genre and the story that you're telling. It might, to me, just an opinion, not a fact, but an opinion I have is like fantasy. I would prefer to read a fantasy novel in past tense. It just seems more natural to me because it's told eons ago in most cases, or it could be futuristic, but it just depends. You have to decide what is best for your story, for your character, as far as tense goes. But I do prefer the past tense. I think it's easier to maintain.
Once upon a time.
Yeah. Once upon a time, happily ever after. There you go. And
when you said third, so you're talking about third person. So this is the omniscient. Is that the right word? The kind of
that third omniscient. Right. Omniscient is a form of third person. You can have third person limited. We'll just go ahead and we'll just dive into that.
Yeah.
So the other mistake that I see, another mistake is as I spoke with, those 3 questions you need to ask yourself. One of them was whether you're going to write in first person or third. Again, the only book I know of recently that's pulled off second person, which is when you say you walked to the store and you did this, was called You by Carolyn Kepnes. And now it's a big Netflix series. It's really good, actually. Other than that, 95% of books are written in first or third person. First person is what it sounds like, which is I walked to the store. I saw her there. I turned my head. Everything is from the perspective of the narrator. The narrator is telling the story in their point of view. Third person, there's different ways to do third person. And I have a preference, believe that or not. There's third person limited, which is where you only get the view of the he. It's written in he, she, they, not I, we. So you're showing the story from the perspective of a character, but you're not inside the character. And within that, there's omniscient, like you were just referring to, which is imagine God was telling the story. If you believed in God or whatever higher being, imagine they were telling the story. Omniscient third means they know everything that every character is thinking, feeling, seeing, desiring, needing, wanting, all that. I think that's tricky. And a lot of classics do it that way. Modern contemporary fiction, we're tending away from omniscient third person. So you're either going to see first person or you're going to see third person limited. And third person limited, which I prefer, is where you would have it written in he or she or they, but in each scene, you stick to that character's point of view only. And if you go outside that, you get into another big mistake that I see often, which is head hopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why it's tricky. I think if you stuck to just first or third and third limited and just leave it at that, you're going to have a lot less difficulty, but it's certainly doable to be an omniscient narrator.
So third limited, I think, is a good one, isn't it? And as you say, avoiding head hopping. Once people understand, let's just talk about head hopping a bit. We've mentioned it a few times on the podcast, and Jenny Nash goes on about this a lot, quite rightly. And it's something, gosh, I read quite a lot of books, indie books now, and I do notice it happening, and it jars with me. But I wonder how much it did before.
It is jarring. That's the word I always use.
Yeah. So let's just describe what head hopping is.
Okay, the best way I've figured to break it down is head hopping is within every scene. You can do it either by chapter or scene. You need to stick with one character and one character only. Within a given scene, if this is Kelly's point of view and it's Kelly's scene and Kelly's doing this and that, and even if there's 3 other people in the room, the reader can only know what Kelly is wanting, thinking, feeling, needing, seeing, observing, all that. If you go outside of Kelly's perspective in her scene and it's all about Kelly, Kelly's observations, and then you tell me, Sam thought to himself, what is Kelly thinking? Mm. That would be head hopping because you've now gotten out of Kelly's head and hopped over into Sam's head. And you can't do that. I think it's better to do it within chapters and dedicate a chapter to a point of view, but it is absolutely 100% acceptable to do it within a scene if you use a hard scene break so that the reader clearly knows that was Sam's scene, now we're in Kelly's scene. And so if you do that, then it's going to be, that's the biggest rule of thumb, is just ask yourself if in that scene, if you go outside of that character's perspective and get into anyone else's head, then you're head hopping.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. And once you know about it, as I say, you do start picking it up in books.
You notice it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think, although I never tell anybody how to write their book and what perspective or what tense, I do think for a new writer, I would not try to tackle omniscient third because it is going to be a really hard distinction between head hopping and omniscient third. So I would stick with a limited perspective. Unless
you are God. In which case,
unless you are God, then by God, just write it however you want to.
Naturally, you just know everything. Okay,
exactly.
Okay, so for the rest of us, mere mortals, so we've chosen our perspective at the beginning, and third limited, I think, is a good one probably to start with, unless you want to try and be really clever, which is not the right thing to do at the beginning.
It works.
And head hopping is a common mistake. What other things are you picking up when people get going, and what challenges do they report to you that they're finding?
Well, really, those are the biggest challenges with craft, other than the basics of grammar, spelling, and punctuation, which you really, you can teach it, but you really have to kind of already have a grasp of that. Punctuation and dialogue, not everybody knows that. So I can teach that. But if someone doesn't have a grasp of basic spelling, grammar, and punctuation, it's really hard to get them into writing a novel. But that aside, outside of the craft, some of the problems, if you don't mind, if we step outside of it, that
Sure.
my clients have reported don't really do with so much the writing technique so much as how do I get motivated? How do I get out of this rut that I'm in? How can I finish my chapter? I don't know how to end my chapter. I don't know how long my book should be. So there's so many things. Really, I don't get as many questions about craft as I do those sorts of things. So basically, we can talk briefly if you want to about some motivational type stuff, like how to get out of a rut. And then we could do some, if we have time, a little bit of developmental. Those are the big things that I deal with on a daily basis.
Well, let's talk about motivation. And I know plenty about that. And drafting a manuscript, and you go through periods where it flows and you can't wait to get back to writing. And a great tip someone told me once is to end your writing sessions in the middle of something you're enjoying writing. Not at the conclusion, because then you've got this hurdle in your mind. You've got to start a new scene the next day, whereas you carry on mid scene. It's a much more motivating. Once you start writing, you're writing. So you go through bits, but other bits where you just. I mean, I will leave it sometimes for weeks because I just think, I don't know where I am. I don't like what I've written so far, and so it is. These ebbs and flows come. So can you give us some tips, some guidance?
Sure,
here?
Absolutely. And to be clear, I've been writing for 10 years and I have 8 books under my belt and all this, but I still do it. I mean, I can't speak for any other successful, famous authors, but I would guarantee that everybody hits those moments. So first thing I would say is you're not abnormal. You're not alone in dealing with that. It is very common. The degree may be different for everybody, but everybody's going to hit a rut. But if you do, one of the things that I have found for myself personally, and even my clients to help, is if you get writer's block, if you want to call it that, or in a rut, even if it's just a temporary one, I always say step away from what's frustrating you. Step away from that chapter that you just can't, if you've pounded your head against the keyboard and nothing's coming out, I recommend stepping away from it. Then but don't go away from writing. I think you should go and do little small writing exercises. Use writing prompts that you can find on Pinterest, or Instagram has a lot of good ones, or write in a journal, or write about your bucket list. Just write something else that keeps your mind focused on writing, and it keeps the creative juices flowing, but you're not so dead set on that one scene that you just can't get through. Another thing that I like to do, to tell my clients to do, and it works for me, is to stop for the day if you just can't get it done that day, and then read. I know it seems oversimplistic, but I find that if I read in the genre that I'm trying to write in, and I read for a day or two and kind of give my brain a break from the writing, I get inspired. Now, obviously, we're not talking about plagiarism or copying, but just inspiration from authors who write similar books. If I'm stuck in a certain scene, I just don't know what I'm going to have happen to the mother at the end of this scene. What is she going to die? Is she going to live? I just don't know. Odds are, if you read something in a book similar to yours, something may spark, and you're like, oh, I know now what I need to do with that mother. That's what I need to do. She needs to overcome the cancer and say, whatever. It just will come to you. At least for me, I find it helps. And some authors find it helps for them too. Other things, believe it or not, as simple as it sounds, go for a jog, go for a walk, have a spot of tea. Isn't that how we say it? Have a spot of tea.
That's what we do in England all the time.
Exactly. There you go. Just do something to get away from it. And then when you sit back down and you've come full circle and you're back to writing, go back to the beginning of that chapter that you're stuck on and read it through from the beginning again. Maybe even use your read aloud feature on a lot of computer programs have that read aloud feature. And sometimes that after that little bit of a break, after some inspiration, it will just come back to you. And if it never, ever does, which I've never seen anybody not get unstuck, but if it ever does, then that may be the universe or God or somebody telling you that it's time to maybe think about a different book to write. If you really get so stuck that you just cannot get out of it after everything you've tried, well, maybe that's just not the book for you. Maybe there's a different one that you're supposed to be writing.
Put it down to a bit of experience of writing, which is never wasted, even if you're writing stuff that gets thrown away. That every bit of writing contributes to your development of writing. And yeah, I do. I love to think of the characters that we create standing around in their world, waiting for us to sit back down It's a kind of motivational thing for me because I think of these guys.
That's true.
I'm writing about a small town near in California, Edwards. These guys just standing around, tapping their fingers, waiting for me, and they just want to get going. They want to know what's happening, so they're waiting for you.
I may use that too. I like that.
Nice little mind technique. So one of the things that you're alluding to here, which we haven't really talked about, is the story itself. Mm-hmm. And some people, I get a bit downhearted when authors say, "Oh, stories just come to me. Oh, yeah, I've got a million stories. That's not my problem. My problem is writing." Because for me, I have characters. I have situations. I do struggle personally with a story.
I agree. And here's what I'm not pulling the BS card on these people, but what I will say is I don't think there's anybody that has an entire fully developed story come to them like that. Now, what I think they may be referring to is the nugget of the idea came to me. And it just sounds good to say, oh, well, the whole thing came to me. I'm not saying they're not right. I'm just saying that I wouldn't let that discourage you, because I think everybody, however much they want to admit it, has to have put some thought into, like you said, the character development. You may have had, and I've had books come to me, quote, in a dream, ideas, but they're just little nuggets of a scene maybe that then I have to sit down and I have to develop fully into a novel. So, yeah, I think that the most important thing, the way that my process works is regardless of how the idea comes to me, it usually starts as a nugget, a little snippet of a book. Like, oh, I see a girl who wants revenge because her daughter died of a heroin overdose and she doesn't believe it was an accident. I mean, that's like so common. That book's been written 20 times. But then you have to think, okay, so there's my nugget. Now, like you said, when you start to develop your characters, there's where the story, I hate to pause here, but it's just something just came to me. I don't know if you've ever heard this quote or statistic or whatever, that there are only 6 story ideas in the whole world. Have you heard this theory?
Yeah.
And I believe it's true to some degree, because, if you boil a lot of these famous books down, especially some like formulaic authors, I won't name names, but, their stories, in and of themselves, are not that original. But what makes them original and makes them bestsellers and makes them stand out is the characters that they create, is the story and the world that they create around their characters, where they choose to set the book. My point being, all those things that, people who don't want to plot at all or plan anything in advance, that's fine. But I think that's where you're going to miss out on some opportunity to make your book really stand out. Because if you can put some thought, really heavy thought, and work into that setting, what's the very best? Don't just plop it in your hometown, because that's easy to do. What is the best setting for this thriller that you want to write about a woman seeking revenge for her daughter's death? What's the best setting for that? Is it New York City? Probably not. There's nothing special about that. Maybe, I don't know, in the bayou of Louisiana, where it's dirty and gritty and hot and sweaty. Maybe you could see that a little better. But that's what I think that you should do after you get that little nugget of an idea, that inspiration. Sit down and plan out your characters. You don't have to plot. You don't have to do it scene by scene, but definitely work on that world building and the characters, and try to develop your story out in general, at least, and know where you want to go with your story.
So starting with the characters, to allow them, if you like, to talk to you once you start thinking it through, how they're going to proceed, and get the story that way. That's a great approach for doing that. And is this an area that your clients struggle with, story, or do they come to you with the story worked out, or think they've got it worked out?
Well, usually they have they're at the nugget phase. Usually they're at that, I have an idea. I want to write a story about a woman who wants revenge. That's usually where they come from. And some may have a little more thought out, but usually once we start talking, a lot of that changes. A lot of what they originally planned on doing may sound good in theory, but when you look at it, it's not a complete story arc, or it's not, the character wasn't developed enough, or maybe that wasn't the best setting that they thought of. So, but yeah, I've never worked with a client who just said, I want to write a book, but I don't know what I want to write about. So they always have something planned out, but often it changes once we start working together. So,
yeah.
I think there's some benefit too, in, like you were mentioning earlier, if you don't have the resources or or don't want to work with a book coach, that's fine. But I like what you said earlier about at least maybe work with a partner, a beta partner. What do you call them? A critique partner or something? Because not only is there the accountability, but the thing that I find my clients find the most valuable, more than probably anything I share with them, is they all say things like, gosh, I just love brainstorming with you. That helps me so much. I didn't even think about that until we talked about it. So there's a lot of value that comes, whether it's with a coach or a partner, in bouncing those ideas off somebody that you trust, that you don't mind sharing your story idea with, that's going to be honest, but not fluff your ego. So you got to find a real easy in between there, and bounce those ideas off and see how they work. I mean, is it going to land, or is it going to, maybe you should think about it a different way,
And in the character journeys, Christina, this is something else that's, I think I've probably fallen foul of, is actually understanding that there needs to be conflicts and understanding that there needs to be a change in them. We use the journey word all the time, and Mark hates it, but I can't think of a better way. I can't think of another word.
I'll remember not to use that around them. Okay, I won't say journey.
But I think at some point, in one iteration of my story, I created far too much of that. There had to be conflict everywhere, and every character had to be on this journey, and I found it a bit overwhelming because ultimately, I'm not sure I've ever read a book like that. You're on one or two characters' journeys, right? And the others are, best will in the world, they're bit players in the story. Is that a better way of looking at it?
It is. And I see what you're saying. And maybe what you did was kind of where you felt you weren't having enough conflict on the character journey, is maybe you compensated a little bit too much on the other end of the spectrum by trying so hard. Sometimes we try too hard. And that may have been what happened there. If you overcompensated by trying to add conflict so much that maybe you made it too complex. I don't know without reading it, but that's what it sounds.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So I think I created conflict with his wife that didn't necessarily need to be there. Apart from me thinking things have to, everyone says you've got to be that point where your hero has no way out, so everything's piled on top of them. So I created all this, and I'm thinking now it's a bit of a drag reading this book. Everyone's
you don't want to overburden your character. Protagonist. That's true. I think that you have to strike a healthy balance between main plot and subplot. And one way that I look at my stories when I'm planning them out is I try to have the main plot focus, obviously, on the protagonist and their journey, their struggle, their whatever. I use the hero's journey a lot with my writing. And then the subplots, I tend to use those to focus my secondary characters and their journeys. Have you ever, this probably will resonate more with females, but maybe you'll get this reference, but I always describe subplots and secondary character storylines as a braid, like a braid that a woman wears in their hair. They're each individual just strands, right? But then you eventually weave, I wish we had a visual, but we could weave them all together. And when you're done, it's one plait. I think, do you all call it a plait?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay. One big braid, plait, whatever. And it's beautiful and it's all come together, but it's a sum of its parts. It's all little tiny individual threads that interweave with the main plot. So that's one, if you feel like you're bogging your character down maybe too much, that's one approach maybe you could use, which is to look at your subplots and see, the subplots should always interweave with the main plot, but never overpower. But as far as like with your character situation, I think that the best thing to do, I would almost go with what you think right now, maybe too much, and you can always pare it back in editing. If you feel like in the end, I would say it'd be easier to pare something back than it would be to go back and have to add stuff in.
Yes, we should sound maybe a bit forced. Yeah, I need to give the guy a break.
Cut him some slack, won't you?
Yeah, exactly. He's having a hard time. Good. So how do people know when their book's finished?
When their book is finished? You mean like first draft is finished?
Yeah. Well, how do they know that they need to write it again? They need to rewrite? Before line editing and stuff. How do they know this is ready to go?
Good question. So what I recommend, and I'd say we're speaking mostly from the point of view of like self-published or indie authors, what I would always recommend, you're done when your book has hit an appropriate word count, which is a big thing that's another thing that actually I just talked about on YouTube today and TikTok, which is there is people struggle over what's the right word count. It's, there is no right or wrong answer, but there are guidelines. So if you can stay in the sweet spot of, for an adult novel, let's say 60 to 100,000 words, depending on your genre, if you hit a decent word count, that's one clue that you're done. Another thing is you want to make sure that your main plot has come full circle and that your character has not only gone through their journey, but they've grown, they've sought redemption, they've found salvation. And this is all theoretical. I mean, they don't literally have to be baptized, but they find some sort of salvation, redeeming, or redemption or something. They've come around, they've come back home, and now they're changed. If that has all happened and all your little plot lines are all tied up and there are no loose ends and no cliffhangers, then you're done. And the very next step I would do is I would go back and self-edit. That's the first thing I would do. Stephen King says to give it, 6 to 8 weeks? He says some long period of time. And I'm not one to question the king, but I agree, but I don't know if you need 8 weeks set aside. Mm-hmm. But I would definitely set your book aside for a week or two at a minimum.
Before you come back to it.
Yeah, before you come back to it. It just gives you a chance to step away from it and get it, it'll seem more fresher to you when you come back to self-edit. But absolutely the very next step I would take after you think you're done, you may be done with the first draft, but I would not even send it off to an editor or do anything with it until you at least go through it one more time and just check yourself. Read aloud is what I would do during that phase. I would use the read aloud feature. Some people really find that very helpful.
Yeah. Okay, and so something I asked at the beginning, but we've talked really about coaching so far. Mm-hmm. So what about somebody who has a finished draft, has listened to this interview and would like a developmental edit? Can you explain how that works?
Yes. So for me and most editors, it works the same way. We'll always do a free sample edit and quote, and we show them how the developmental and the line editing works. But once we're hired, the way that we do ours is I always try to get the client to do a developmental edit first if they haven't, worked with me on coaching. Because if you think about it this way, if you did line editing first and you made all the little technical changes, then you did a content edit and had a bunch of substantive changes, you're going to have to edit it again. Yeah. So our process is to do the content edit first, which we do by just going through. I give my editors and myself, we all have this long 3-page list of questions that we ask ourselves about the book that we're editing. Is the character fully developed? Is the protagonist introduced well in the first scene? Is it, all the way through 3 pages worth of questions. And we go through and look for with a fine tooth comb, every single timeline inconsistency, every plot hole, everything that needs to be developed further. We go through all of that. And what we do at Write Your Best Book is we present our clients with the manuscript, which may have some side notes, common comments in the margins, but we also present them with a memo, which is usually 2 to 5 pages long and in bullet form that says on page 15, you need to do this. Think about developing your character further, whatever. And that's how we approach content editing. I'd say most editors do it somewhat the same, but that's our process.
Yeah. So
I know that the memo is something that we do a little bit differently.
So that the writer takes that away and then hopefully goes through and makes those changes. And as part of that initial quote, would that normally involve them returning the edits to you, or
when we quote the way I don't know how other editors do it, but when we quote them, I give them, here's your content editing quote, here's your line editing quote, and then here's your combo. Like if you do both with us, so they know what it all is going to cost up front from the very beginning.
Yeah. Good. Well, the time has raced through tonight and I've been learning loads. So I always think hopefully the interviews go best when I'm learning, because I think a lot of people listen to this at a similar stage to me, which is trying to become a writer. And thank you for demystifying some of those areas, those common areas, which is really good. You better tell people where they can find you. You've mentioned it a couple of times, but.
Yeah, I will. I'll just make sure it's really easy. It's a little bit of a long word, but it's Write Your Best Book. That will get you to our website, which is writeyourbestbook.com. All social media platforms are Write Your Best Book. And if anybody ever wants to reach out to me directly, I welcome it. I have several different emails. So this is my not private one, which is info@writeyourbestbook.
Superb. And we didn't talk about rates, but there's a rate card page there. So if people want to dig a bit deeper there,
yep.
they get a very good idea of how much this service is going to cost.
Yeah, I believe in putting it all up front. I don't believe in hiding fees. So
we certainly appreciate that as writers. Christina, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Whereabouts are you? I forgot to ask.
I am in Kentucky in the good old US of A.
I thought there was a bit of a southern twang going on there.
It is southern. I've worked hard, but it's still there. It's I'm in the horse capital of the world. We're in Lexington.
Oh, is that where the Derby is?
Everything is run.
Oh, we say Derby, you say Derby, which is, by the way, how it's spelled.
Different.
Yeah. Oh, great. Okay, well, I've never been.
We had the Queen Mum here a few years ago.
You did? Well, she loves her horses, so yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be on your show.
Christina, it was brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go, Christina Kaye. Someone like you doesn't need a book coach, Mark, but book coaches as an idea, I'm thoroughly in favour of them. I think having a holding hand, someone holding your hand when you're trying to navigate the frankly bewildering world of what it actually takes to write a novel is very, very useful service.
Absolutely. I mean, I had when I was traditionally published, I had some developmental editing help, and it's very useful when you don't really know what you're doing. And I think this is a useful service that people people can take advantage of and enjoy that kind of tuition to enable them to write better characters and make things more credible. So it's a good idea. I'm all for it.
Yeah. And I think that is the tricky bit for me. I can sort of tell the story, okay, I can work out the story so much, but a lot of the discussions I have with people, and I'm hopefully getting notes back on my first book. I'm in the middle of writing my second one, but first book next month. And I know the discussion is going to be about character development. I don't think he's going to say, you need to change the story dramatically, but he's going to say, I didn't like this character at the beginning, but I'm supposed to like him at the end. Or on a current book, I'm thinking a lot about the sort of slightly hidden side of a character and how much to reveal, and whether in the end, I think what you tend to do, certainly in the first draft, you write quite one-dimensional characters. Because you're writing the story, you don't really think so much about how they behave and act and language they use. I'm hoping for my second book that the second draft will be where I can, in a much more easier process than the first book, go through and make sure the character properly starts in one place and finishes in another. Is that how, I don't know, that's how I'm thinking it's going to work with my second draft. Is that how it works with you? Do you knock out a first draft that's, I suppose by now, your first drafts are quite close to the complete draft, aren't they?
Not a million miles away. I mean, I'm actually in the process of just finishing, kind of in somewhere on the last lap for the new Milton book. And it's my favorite part now because I'm going through and applying a final polish and kind of layering on detail, which is fun. So, I'm looking at Google Maps to find little interesting landmarks I could drop in. Things like food, taste, and smell will be the kinds of things I add in at this level. And there's going to be, Milton has a fairly significant event happen to him that shakes something that's quite fundamental to his character. So I need to think quite carefully about how I'm going to show that, because it's something that will change. This is the 18th book, so it's something that will put him back in a certain way. I want to make sure that that's handled effectively, incredibly, and sensitively. So that's going to be fun, and that's the kind of thing that I do at this kind of late stage draft. So probably a couple of weeks out from getting this off to the editor myself. So always my favorite part of the process.
Your books are contemporary. Have you mentioned pandemic?
No, readers. No, I mean they don't. There's a different. It's not. You say it's contemporary in the sense that it exists in a world which is obviously based on our world, and it is intended to be our world. But we don't have to be slavish with regards to viruses and things like that. I don't think readers are interested in that necessarily. In a book that I'm completely sure readers would not want me to talk about Milton having to put a mask on to go into a shop. They're just not interested in that. They don't necessarily want to be reminded of the last 8 months and 2020. They want to be with a character, not have to think about that kind of stuff. That's not what they're reading for. It's not escapism. If I'm reminding them of things that might be painful or frustrating, so no, I don't include that kind of detail. If I was writing, a different kind of book, yeah, sure. I mean, if I was writing a book about pandemics, obviously, you would include that. But no, this won't be. There will be no viruses in a Milton book. You can take that to the bank.
But what about in the future when we're past the pandemic stage and the pandemic becomes part of our shared experience of life on Earth, if you like, a bit like the Second World War? Well, you'll refer to the war, right? The Gulf War, the Second World War, and maybe major moments like assassinations. Does the pandemic not become part of that it's in a shared experience in the background, even if it's not central to your book, as I mentioned?
No, because the question would then be, why didn't I write about it in these books, that are supposed to be around the time? So no, it won't. It will never be referred to. It doesn't happen in my fictional little world. So yeah, those kinds of events you mentioned, wars and things from 20, 25 years ago, I wasn't writing books that were contemporaneously set at the early 90s. I am writing books that are set in 2020 or in and around that date. So it would be a bit odd if I didn't write about it now and then introduced it, dropped it in 5 books' time, and it would just feel very weird. So no, I will not be. There will be no viruses in my books, guaranteed.
Well, the only viruses will be made in a Russian lab and unleashed on...
Well, that's true. Yes, that's true. That's true. I mean, Novichok, not a virus. We have had a few kind of references to nerve agents and things, but yeah, not this particular virus.
No. Okay, enough of the virus. Good. Right. Thank you very much indeed. I want to say thank you to Christina Kaye for being our guest this week. A reminder that Self-Publishing Formula.com/101 is the place to go to get more information about Self-Publishing 101 course. And don't forget, we have that webinar coming up on Tuesday, the 6th of October. You can register. It's free, of course. How to get your first or next 10 book reviews if you pop along to selfpublishingformula.com/get book reviews. That's it. All that remains for me to say is that it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.